Hello boys and girls, welcome back to our Bible Stories online. Today we're going to be reading another awesome story, a true story from the Bible. But before we do that, I thought it would be good just to remember what we've been reading together so far. We've been reading in the Old Testament about how God has worked through His people. And there's been a lot of stories. So I thought, why don't we recap? So if you're joining us for the first time, why don't you listen and hear what we've been doing so far? If you don't remember, that's also okay. Here's a quick reminder. So we started in Genesis, where God created the world. And God said that everything He created was good. And He created Adam and Eve, and they were also created good. Then we had the sad day where sin came into the world. And Satan came and tempted Adam and Eve, and they sinned against God and disobeyed Him. And so sadly, they were kicked out of the garden. And life outside the garden, we also learned, was not easy. And humanity and God's people continued to disobey Him and didn't love Him the way they were supposed to. So God promised that He would bring judgment. And so He brought the flood. But luckily for humanity, luckily for God's people, He started afresh with Noah, who built an ark and was rescued and saved from the flood. Then we saw that God made a big promise to Abraham to grow his family. He also promised Abraham a son named Isaac. And Isaac had children, and Isaac's children had children, and Isaac's children's children had children. And God's people just continued to grow, so much so that Pharaoh got so angry. And Pharaoh took God's people into captivity. They became slaves. And Pharaoh was horrible to God's people. But God promised that He would rescue them, and He did. God brought His people out of Egypt and into the land of Canaan, and this is what we read last week. We read that God's people were in God's place, but unfortunately there were other people living in God's place. So God promised that He would remove these people from the land and give the land to His people. So God's people walked around the walls of Jericho for 6 days. And do you know what happened on the 7th day? The walls came crumbling down, and God drove Israel's enemies out of the land. And God's people were able to live there, and they were blessed in the land under the leader Joshua. But after Joshua died, God's people began to sin once again. And God raised up the Philistines. Now you might know this name because one of the most famous Philistines was Goliath. And Goliath was about this big. But that's not where the story ends. God raised up David to defeat Goliath, which He did. And God's people were rescued once again. And David was later going to become king. And God's people would serve him under David's rule. So once again, it looked like a very good story where God's people were being blessed. And today, we're going to learn more about that when Jenny comes to read. So I'm actually going to welcome Jenny up. I'm going to call her up here. And we're going to do a little interview. So I've prepared, this is Jenny. So hi, Jenny.
Hi.
So I've come up with some fun questions that I'm going to ask Jenny. I'm going to ask her which she prefers. I'm going to name 2 things, and Jenny's going to tell us which she likes more. So Jenny, cookies or cake?
Cake.
Cake. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Waffles. Mornings or evenings?
Mornings.
Nice. Summer or winter?
Oh, for now, I'll say winter.
Durban summers are hot.
Yes.
Books or movies?
Movies.
Movies. And then last one, chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Vanilla. Perfect. Okay, so I thought before Jenny reads, we'll do a quick exercise. So it's going to go like this. I'm going to touch my head, and I'm going to say head, and you guys have to copy me. Okay, so it's going to go like this. Head, shoulders, knees, toes. Okay, that's easy, right? So I want all of you to stand up and follow me. I don't think Jenny, you don't have to do this, Jenny. I'll do it alone. Okay, so head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And then it goes eyes and ears and mouth and nose. Okay, we're going to see how quickly you guys can do it, just to make sure you don't fall asleep and that you're not paying attention. Okay, so on the count of 3, we're going to go. Head, 3, 2, 1. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, and eyes and ears and mouth and nose. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, head, shoulders, knees and toes, head, shoulders, knees and toes, and eyes and ears and mouth and nose. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, head, shoulders, knees and toes, head, shoulders, knees and toes, and eyes and ears and mouth and nose. Head, shoulders, knees and toes. Okay, I'm sure you're all awake, so I'm going to let Jenny read for us, and I hope you listen because we might have some questions afterwards for you. Cool.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Hi, boys and girls. Well, so good to be here with you, and I'm going to read today from the story God's Blessings Growing. Well, I am Jenny, as I said, and I also have 4 kids. I have 3 grown kids, and I have a little 5-year-old, Callum. I think some of you might know. Well, so I do this daily, day and night, reading stories. So here we go. Let's, as Amy recapped, so we're just going to continue. All right. David was amazed at how good God was. David wanted to do something nice for God. So David decided to build God a house. How about that? Can anybody build God a house? Well, anyway, David wanted to do that. But one night, God sent word to David. He didn't want David to build him a house. God said that David's son would build the house instead. Then God surprised David. God promised to build David a house. Not a real house made from bricks or book or wood, but a kingdom, God's kingdom. And then God surprised David again. God promised him that someone from David's family would live forever as God's king. If that weren't enough, God surprised David again. This forever ruler would be the promised one, who would bring God's blessing to all the peoples of the earth. God's surprising promise made David very happy. He thanked God, and the promise was written in God's holy book. After David died, David's son Solomon became king. With gold and wood, he built God a great house. It was a beautiful place called a temple. The temple was where the people made blood sacrifices for their sins. When God saw that great sign, He would forgive or pass over the sins of His people. After the temple was finished, God came down in a cloud. The people were happy and gave thanks to the Lord, saying, "He is good, for His steadfast love endures forever." A queen came to see Solomon, his palace, and the temple he had built. She asked him lots of questions, and God gave Solomon wisdom for them all. The queen was amazed and greatly helped by all he said, and was blessed by God for having come. You see, God was keeping all His promises to Abraham. He had already made Abraham into a great nation, and He had given Israel the land. And now God's king was bringing God's blessings to other peoples of the earth. Does this make you wonder if Solomon might be God's forever king? Could he be the promised one to bring God's blessings to everyone? Well, children, this has been an exciting time to listen to God's word. Well, as we look at the story, we see when God promised or surprised David. I know many of us like surprises. I like surprises, but I know kids love surprises too. And it was amazing to see how God surprised him so many times. But the one king that God has promised us, that is to come. Do you know who that one? That one king that is going to come and live forever, and God's appointed king? Yes, that's a good guess. Well, if some of you don't know, maybe you can speak to mom and ask mom or dad to tell you a little bit more of who this coming king is. And we're all going to be so happy to see him one day. Well, children, thank you for listening. We'll see you soon again. Have a lovely week. Bye-bye.